Welcome to my channel, ketomealsandrecipes.com. I have chosen today's video recipe because I'm celebrating this channel's 7th year anniversary and my birthday, which happened to be on the same day, February 28th. This specific recipe was chosen because last fall we had an opportunity to visit and spend several days in Kyoto and Tokyo, Japan. I will not talk about our trip in this video, but please do look forward to future videos where I'll spend more time describing where we went, what we did, the food, and our impressions of both Kyoto, Tokyo, and Vietnam. To pay homage to the Japanese culture, the treat recipe I will be making today is my adaptation of a low-carb keto, gluten-free, sugar-free version of this delicious Japanese matcha roll cake. The inspiration for this recipe came while we were in Japan, where I saw so many great desserts, such as this little matcha cake. They were sold everywhere. I was also impressed by the Japanese aesthetic, which is so beautiful, clean, and elegant. This aesthetic follows through in all of their simple treats, such as the one I've shown you, all of their food presentation, and their built and natural environment. If you're wondering what this tastes like, let me explain. The roll cake has a very balanced, light, not too sweet, but noticeably that light, earthy matcha tea taste. And according to my family, it tastes just like the matcha cake we had in Kyoto. The cake itself is soft and moist, and the filling is perfectly balanced with a semi-sweet cream with just a hint of matcha tea flavor. I wanted to make this light-tasting matcha Japanese dessert because I think it's a great introduction to the use of matcha tea powder when making Japanese recipes. And matcha tea has many health benefits, including having a lot of antioxidants called catechins and another group called polyphenols. As I read someplace, matcha powder offers a mega dose of these powerful antioxidants. And there are a lot of other health benefits, so please leave me a comment if you would like me to do a video explaining how matcha tea is cultivated and the health benefits. I'd be happy to do so. Now, the macronutrient ratio for each serving of the Japanese matcha roll cake is 4.3 to 1, with 3.5 grams of total carbs, 0.7 grams of soluble fiber, 0.8 grams of insoluble fiber, resulting in only 2 grams of net carbs and 208 calories per serving. Before getting started, I want to mention that even though this recipe looks very complicated, I assure you it's quite simple to make. Just follow along. And to make it easier, I have segmented this recipe into steps. Now let's get to step 1, which is to make the sheet pan cake. First, preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit or about 177 degrees Celsius, or as close as you can get to that. And line a 17 centimeter by 42 centimeter or 11 inch by 17 inch full-size baking sheet with parchment paper. Here's a little hint I'd like to share. To help your parchment stick flat, I first grease the bottom of the pan, then place the parchment on top and smooth it out to get all the air bubbles out. Now for the cake, you will need 2 separate bowls. Begin by separating the room temperature whites and yolks. And when using egg whites, here's something that I would like to recommend. To prevent contaminating the whites with any droplets of egg yolk, use a little bowl to crack each egg individually into, as I'm doing here. Put the egg yolks in one bowl and the whites directly into a stand mixer bowl. Once I have separated all the eggs, I'm just going to set the bowl with the egg whites aside for a moment. Now, back to the bowl with the egg yolks. Pour in your heavy whipping cream, the melted coconut oil. You want to use the refined because there's no taste. Add the pure vanilla, then sprinkle in the finely ground salt. Give the egg yolks and these ingredients a good whisk or stir. Next, place a fine mesh sieve on top of your mixing bowl and drop in the almond flour, the matcha powder, a gluten-free baking powder, and your sweetener, which I ground to a fine confectioner powder. And then with a whisk, Stir these in order to help them pass through the sieve. By the way, I would not omit the sieve. It's very important that you sift everything because it helps to break up any almond flour clumps and it aerates all the dry ingredients, which is very important in order to achieve that light, moist texture for this cake. The best way to incorporate the dry ingredients and the yolk mixture is to start at the center, working outwards. Using this method helps to prevent huge lumps from forming. When you have incorporated the dry ingredients, pour in some of the water. I'm really sorry, at this point my camera turned off because the battery died and I didn't notice, so I didn't get to show you when I added the water, but I did add it. Then after adding the water, continue whisking until you have a somewhat thick but homogeneous creamy mixture, and set this bowl aside. Now for step 2. Now back to the bowl with the egg whites. First, begin by whisking until the albumin, or the liquid white part, is frothy. At this point, add in your distilled white vinegar and continue whisking until the egg whites are a medium soft peak stage. Don't overwhip the egg whites, and especially don't go to the stiff peak stage, which will make it much harder to combine the egg whites into the batter. Next, scoop out a large dollop of whipped egg whites and transfer to the bowl with the matcha batter. Whisk very vigorously. This will loosen the batter and make it much easier to incorporate the rest of the egg whites without completely deflating the egg whites in the process. Add the rest of the egg whites and fold gently. Keep scooping from the bottom and folding into the center. Keep doing this until the egg whites are just combined. Do not overmix. We're now at step 3. Get your parchment lined baking sheet and pour the cake batter into the center of the parchment. Using an offset spatula, begin at the center and push the batter towards the outer edges. As you're doing so, try to even out the batter layer. It's very important that the edges are not thinner than the center. And that's because you're making a roll cake, so you want the entire cake layer to be about the same thickness. After you have spread out all your batter, place the baking sheet in the middle position of your preheated oven. Set your timer for exactly 10 minutes if you have a convection oven, or 12 minutes if you have a regular oven, but do not overbake. You want the cake to be nice and moist so it doesn't get too dry and crack. When the timer goes off, remove the cake from the oven immediately. And now for step 4. Place a clean tea towel onto a cooling rack like this and sprinkle about 1 teaspoon of powdered sweetener over the surface of the towel. This will help in preventing sticking. Get a hold of the towel and the rack together and flip it over onto the baking sheet. Then holding both parts together, the cooling rack and the baking sheet, flip over so that the baking sheet is on top. Tap the bottom of the baking sheet. This will help loosen the pan and make it easier to remove. Then gently, with even pressure, peel off the parchment. This cake is still very warm, and it's important that you immediately get a hold of one end of your tea towel, make a bit of a fold, and gently and loosely roll the cake in the towel. I'll explain why. I was so busy concentrating on making sure that my motions were in the frame of my video that I accidentally rolled the cake a little bit too tight. I will explain the results a little bit later. Before continuing, it's really important that you set your cake aside and let it cool to room temperature. It should take between 1 and 2 hours. While your cake is cooling, you have enough time to prepare the matcha cream filling, which brings us to step 5. In a small bowl, add your room temperature water, your confectioner's sweetener, and matcha powder. And then whisk until the matcha mixture is velvety smooth and completely lump-free. This is very important. This may take a couple minutes. And then just set it aside for a moment. Now pour your heavy whipping cream into a mixing bowl and whip to the point where it just starts to get a little bit thick. Very, very light peak stage. Pour in the matcha tea mixture and gently fold at low speed. You're just blending, not whipping. In fact, it might be a really good idea to then stop and scrape from the bottom because that's where most of the matcha tea has settled. Then continue whisking just until the cream is starting to get a bit stiffer, sort of medium stiffness stage. I would strongly suggest you stop whisking, remove the whisk itself, and use this whisk to fold and incorporate all the matcha tea. Because I'm not quite ready to assemble everything, I'm going to cover the bowl and refrigerate until it's needed. Everything is ready, so let's get to step 6, to assemble the roll cake. My cake is at room temperature, so I'm going to unroll it. As I mentioned earlier, I rolled my cake too tightly. So as you can see, I'm getting a few light cracks. But luckily, these cracks are shallow and only in the center part of the cake, and they didn't go all the way through. That is why you roll loosely. Get your whipped matcha cream from the refrigerator and place a large dollop in the center. And using your offset spatula again, spread it evenly over the entire surface of the cake, stopping about 1.5 to 2 inches or 3.8 to 5 centimeters from one of the ends. The last assembly step is to re-roll the cake, which you do gently but with enough pressure to make sure that you're not creating air gaps between the cream and the cake. The good news is we're almost done. All that's left is to garnish, and I'm going to keep it very simple. All I do is I place 1 teaspoon of finely ground confectioner's sweetener into a small sieve and then just dust the surface of my roll. The slight dusting is all you need. The cake is amazing on its own and doesn't need anything more. Although the roll is completely assembled and garnished, it's not quite ready to serve. The first thing I do is I transfer the roll onto my serving platter, which I cover with cling wrap, and then refrigerate for a minimum of 2 hours, but if you can, leave it in the fridge overnight. You'll find that the matcha flavor will develop to its fullest, and you'll also notice that the cream will moisten the cake and set properly. It's now time to serve my cake, so for presentation purposes, I usually like to trim the raggedy ends of the cake. I have to admit, I take these ends as the baker's bonus. So good. Then all that is left to do is to slice the matcha cake and serve with pride. One last tip, only cut enough slices for the number of servings you need. Then cover the rest of the matcha roll with the cling wrap and refrigerate. This matcha roll cake will last beautifully in your refrigerator for up to 5 days. I can assure you this is truly an elegant and absolutely delicious Japanese flavored matcha Swiss roll cake. I will be posting a few more Japanese recipes that were inspired by our trip to Japan, so please come back when I post them. If you have been to Japan, please let me know where you visited, your experiences, and your favorite things about the trip. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch the video, especially if you supported me by watching it all the way to the end. If you like this matcha roll cake, please share the link with someone that you think might also like this recipe. And most of all, I hope you come back when I post my next video. Until next time, all the very best to you and your loved ones. Cheers!